Free speech, it seems to me, has never been under more ferocious attack in the West than it is right now. Why is that, and what do we do about it?
There definitely is an attack on freedom of speech, even freedom to read. In the United States, Ron DeSantis is running for president, as he just announced, has imposed regulations, laws in Florida, which make it illegal to teach authentic American history. You have to teach a kind of history which glorifies the United States, nothing about what actually happened. This is happening in Republican legislatures around the country. The libraries are being forced to throw out books. There's laws passed to say there are topics you're not allowed to talk about.
Well, he would
You
argue,
can't.
I mean, DeSantis would argue, I've interviewed him, he would argue that he.
What's up, Nothing Burgers? Got a special drive-through episode this morning while I'm drinking my cup of coffee that I wanted to watch with you guys. You know, it's a little bit of a throwback, not a super throwback, but a throwback. And, you know, if you're interviewing a guy like Noam Chomsky, it's going to be evergreen content. Piers Morgan sat down with the great linguist, thinker, activist, Professor Noam Chomsky. He really flips the script and tells Piers, hey, there is a huge problem with cancel culture in this country, but it's not coming from where you think it is. Let's watch.
Two, another issue I think we have more common ground on. Free speech, it seems to me, has never been under more ferocious attack in the West than it is right now. Why is that, and what do we do about it?
There definitely is an attack on freedom of speech, even freedom to read. In the United States, Ron DeSantis is running for president, as he just announced, has imposed regulations, laws in Florida, which make it illegal to teach authentic American history. You have to teach a kind of history which glorifies the United States, nothing about what actually happened. This is happening in Republican legislatures around the country.
And again, look at how visibly uncomfortable Piers Morgan gets because he knows he doesn't want to get in a head-to-head debate with a titan of an intellectual like Noam Chomsky. And he's just taken what Piers Morgan sets up as, oh, let's get on to something that we both agree on, free speech, right? And then Noam Chomsky completely flips the script on him. This is what's so brilliant about Noam Chomsky's debate style. All he's done is present 100% facts, right? Baseline facts. You can't dispute them. Indisputable facts, right? He said Ron DeSantis is making it harder for kids to read. He's making it harder for them to get access to certain books. He's making it harder for them to teach teachers to teach them what actually happened in American history, right? We're not allowed to talk about what we actually did to the Native Americans. We're not allowed to call it a genocide. We're not allowed to talk about Jim Crow laws. We're not allowed to talk about what actually happened during Reconstruction. We're not allowed to talk about any of that, right? No, that doesn't make America look good. That's not patriotic. That's not propaganda that moves the machine forward. That's not painting the image that a guy like Ron DeSantis, a proto-fascist like Ron DeSantis, wants to present. And you can see how he wanted Noam Chomsky to talk about the blue-haired leftists that are discrediting the movement that he once led, like a lot of older folks will. Noam Chomsky is way too smart for that, and he's also too committed to the cause. He's not going to blame young people. He's going to talk about the institutions of power that are pulling the levers, that are making it harder and harder for people to speak up and to learn.
The libraries are being forced to throw out books. There's laws passed to say there are topics you're not allowed to talk about.
Well, he would argue, I mean, DeSantis would argue, I've interviewed him, he would argue that he is focused on things like critical race theory, which he feels is inappropriate for teaching young children. He thinks that gender ideology should not be taught to young children. And it has a lot of support. A lot of Floridians agree with him about this.
Critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Does anybody know? Critical race theory is a slogan invented by the right wing, and the person who invented it, Christopher Rufo, has been very open and frank. He says we just use this as a way to refer to everything we hate. If you want to know what critical race theory actually is, it's a small academic discipline which investigates systematic elements of racism in American education. So they certainly exist. It's never reached the schools. Schools wouldn't even know what it is. This is invented by the right wing, exactly as Rufo stated, to refer to everything we hate and want to destroy, like teaching American history, like teaching gender issues. We hate that, so we'll call it critical race theory. But it's a small academic discipline which no one ever heard of until it was picked up primarily by Rufo, then expanded through the Republican echo chamber to be some major attack
Well,
on.
let's
And before Pierce butts back in, I want to point out, do you guys see how much more leeway Piers gives a guy like Noam Chomsky than he would any other guest? And it's so important that the left holds on to and cherishes these voices that we have, who have credibility, who have clout and authority in such a manner, in such spades, that a guy like Piers Morgan wouldn't dare cut off Noam Chomsky at 90 some odd years old as he's trying to articulate his point, right? He is, especially as a good Brit, right? He's not going to interject and be rude until it's his place to. What he says is going to be very foolish, but at least he's going to give Noam Chomsky the space to absolutely shred each of his arguments as they come forward.
Look, I don't disagree that the right obviously have a lot of issues. On the far right in particular, we've seen a rise of white supremacy in America, a rise of far right domestic terrorism and so on. That's completely inarguable. But also we've seen a rise of what I would call a very strange version of liberalism, this very ultra woke so-called liberalism, which I would liken more to fascism, albeit without the extreme violence, but the mindset of wanting to control how people think, wanting to cancel people for having different opinions, deplatforming speakers you don't like at university, and so on, which to me is the antithesis of what liberalism was supposed to be. What do you think of that phenomenon?
I've been, as you know, probably very much opposed to the actions of small sectors of young people who are picking up the traditional cancellation, which has been endemic in the academic world and in the political world for years. I can give you examples from my own experience. Cancellation of the left has been constant. It's only you want me to spend time, I could tell you from my own experience, which is small of it. Now, small segments of young people are picking up that same improper policy and should be opposed. We should oppose it just as we should have opposed the massive cancellation that has been accepted for decades because it was directed against the left and dissident opinion. So yes, it's wrong.
Let me ask you, Noam, I mean, you're, like I said, you're 94 years old. Is there any great burning question in life that I find it hard to believe you haven't found the answer to everything, given how massive your brain is. But is there anything left that you would love to know the answer to, that you've never, to your satisfaction, worked out?
Well, moving to another domain of intellectual, professional pursuits, there is a question that was asked by Galileo, then by his associates in the 17th century, which is as yet unanswered. How are you and I able to do what we are now doing? How, as Galileo put it, how is it possible with a finite number of symbols to produce an infinite number of thoughts and even use these symbols to allow others who have no access to our minds to access to their inner workings of our minds? How is this miracle possible? Was raised by Galileo, studied by major concern for Descartes, other leading figures in the 17th century began working on it. We now understand some aspects, but the major questions are not only unanswered, but we don't even know how to approach an answer. So that's a leading one of many leading problems.
And I've actually been fortunate enough. Me and Gavin interviewed Noam Chomsky during the pandemic when he was at home and he was taking a lot of calls and he was very generous with his time. He did not really like us very much. I don't think he got our sense of humor. You know, we tried to be ourselves and I don't think that was quite the way to go. But it's true that when you're in his presence, even if it's just via a Zoom call, you can feel the moment. And I think it's all over Pierce's face right now, even though he disagrees with the overwhelming majority of Noam's political analysis, right? Because he's married to a lot of his culture war issues. You know, Piers Morgan has all but become a full-blown MAGA guy, as the chat has been pointing out, right? But he's still so obviously smitten by Noam's genius. He's still so obviously over the moon to be sharing this dialogue with him. You could tell that even after all of these interviews that he's done over the years, that being able to share and have an exchange of ideas with Noam Chomsky, it's just so overwhelmingly powerful to him. And again, I just don't think that the left can really, you know, fully soak up Noam Chomsky enough while we still have him and understand and deeply appreciate what he's been able to do for our cause, because he has so much credibility that he's even made, you know, Piers Morgan become all flowery in a, 18-minute relatively terse conversation.
And what has been the, when you look back at your life, what has been the greatest moment of your life?
I can't say. A lot of great moments.
If I had the power to let you relive one moment in your life, what would you go for?
Some moments are almost miraculous, like the birth of my first child, say, many other things like it. But I don't see much point talking about my personal life and situation. There are more important things in the world.
Do you feel the world is a better place than when you were born, or a worse place?
Well, I was born in 1928, right before the Great Depression, which of course was far more severe than anything we've suffered recently. As I was growing up as a young child, fascism was spreading through Europe. It looked unstoppable. Actually, the first article I remember writing for a school newspaper began with the fall of Austria, Czechoslovakia. Barcelona was right after the fall of Barcelona with Franco, when it seemed as if the fascist plague.
And you're doing the math correctly in your head. He was like 10 years old writing about this, guys. And it's so crazy. He's such a fountain of knowledge. And that's why I wanted to let this play out even further, guys. At 10 years old, he was writing about the fall of Austria and Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, or, whatever the fuck it was called back then. The fact that he has the perspective of going all the way back to, he was born the year before the Great Depression. Okay. He remembers all of World War II. He remembers all of the, American 50s, then Vietnam, and then the 80s and the Reagan years. And then you have Bill Clinton, and then you go into the war on terror. This guy has seen it all. He has been there. He has documented it. He's written extensively about it, and he's opposed it time after time. It's crazy.
Was unstoppable. Those were very dark moments. Another extremely dark moment was August 6th, 1945, when I was then 16 years old enough to understand. It was clear that humans were moving towards the capacity to destroy everything that came a few years later. Has the world changed for the better? In many ways. Take the United States, country I know best. Go back to the 1960s. The 1960s, the United States had anti-miscegenation laws that were so extreme that the Nazis refused to accept them. In the 1960s, the United States did have federally subsidized housing, but it was segregated. Not for blacks. That meant a black man could maybe get a job in an auto plant during the boom period of the 50s, but he couldn't use it to acquire wealth. Wealth in the United States mainly means property, enormous legacy of hundreds of years of slavery and horrors. Women's rights were not accepted. In fact, in the 1960s, in principle, the United States still accepted British common law, which the founding fathers had explicitly accepted. And according to that law, Blackstone, women were not persons. They were property, the property of the father handed over to the husband. Well, that was eroded over the years, but it literally wasn't until 1975 that the Supreme Court formally determined that women are persons. They're peers. They have a right to appear in federal trial. Well, all of these things have changed. Those are all steps forward. It's now called wokeness, but it's steps forward towards a more caring, egalitarian, just society. Sometimes goes overboard, but on the whole, it's been a very positive development.
When you, again, look at your life in its totality, what do you think your greatest achievement has been?
See, Piers is tone deaf as shit. That's the one thing that Noam does not want to talk to you about, right? He does not want to get into his own personal life. He wants to keep that shit private. He's so generous with his time. It's like, dude, just ask me about the world. Ask me about my thoughts about the world. Ask me about something else. Don't ask me about my grandchildren. Don't ask me about, like he considers it vain. He considers it a waste of time and also probably none of your fucking business, right? And the fact that he keeps trying to really gently push Piers away from it and the fact that Piers doesn't listen, we can skip ahead because we can actually just keep listening. We don't have to skip ahead, but you guys you're not in a rush. We've got a few more stories too if you guys want to get into them. We'll see what's up, but anyway,
that's for other people to determine. You want to know what I think? It'll be something you never heard of.
Try me.
For 25 years, I was spending a great deal of effort in the United States, in Britain, to try to stop the worst atrocity of the post-war period, the US British-backed Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which wiped out about a third of the population. Could have been stopped instantly at any point. It was necessary to try to engage large
Vincent Bevins has a book about this called The Jakarta Method, if anybody's curious, or you could watch a really incredible documentary called The Act of Killing. It also talks about this.
masses of the population to compel, finally, 1999 did compel Bill Clinton to call it off. Something was saved. It seemed impossible. How could a small island of a couple 100,000 people resist an invasion by a major country supported by the greatest military powers in the world?
Or at least that's what I thought he was talking about, the killing of communists in Indonesia. This might be something separate than that I need to Google.
It finally succeeded.
And your support for that is, in your estimation, your greatest achievement?
In the area of social and political policy, one. There are others. I was very active from the early 1960s when John F. Kennedy radically escalated the war in Vietnam. From that point, I devoted enormous effort to opposition, to direct resistance, faced imprisonment, finally enough opposition to develop to prevent Richard Nixon from moving on to nuclear weapons as seemed likely. So that's an achievement.
It certainly was. Who has been for you the best American president of your lifetime, and who's been the worst?
In my lifetime, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
And the worst?
Too much competition, I'm afraid.
I know you're not a massive fan of Donald Trump. How do you feel about him running again?
No. If he runs again, it'll be a disaster for the world for many reasons. For one thing, Trump, as you saw during his first time, is dedicated Actually,
And obviously, this is from the Republican primary time period, right? So Ron DeSantis is still running. I don't think that Donald Trump had officially announced yet. Obviously, he's now the president-elect. So
he has two commitments. One commitment is to himself. He's a paranoid, he's a megalomaniac, psychopath. All that concerns him is me. The other commitment is to serve corporate power and great wealth abjectly. His one legislative achievement was a huge tax gift to the ultra wealth, ultra rich, and the corporate sector, nothing else. But he is a major climate denialist. He denies that global warming is taking place. He wants to maximize the use of fossil fuels, including the most dangerous of them, and to eliminate regulations which might mitigate the catastrophe. That's a death sentence for the human species. Domestically, he's made it very clear that he wants to institute what we would properly call
and I feel like that's something that hasn't been getting the full weight of conversation it deserves because we've been so preoccupied with discussing the more immediate outcomes, right? And that's kind of the problem with climate change, right? I think the best way to describe climate change was the way that David Wallace Wells did, the guy that's the editor-in-chief of the New York Magazine. He called it a hyper object, or maybe he cited somebody else that called it a hyper object. Anyway, that was the first time I heard it. A hyper object is something that the human brain just can't fully fathom, right? We can't wrap our minds around it because, like, it's kind of like how an ant is never going to understand particle physics, right? We're never going to understand some things. Like, we're never going to understand the truly infinite nature of outer space. We're never going to be able to comprehend how huge the ocean is. We're never going to be able to understand how we got here, right? There's some things that the human beings, we're incredibly capable beings, right? We've proven a lot, but there's some things that we're going to be just at our wit's end about it. And one of the things that we have a hard time doing is understanding fully things that are going to impact us down the line, but we have no way of seeing an impact on us yet. So while we're prioritizing kitchen table issues, while we're prioritizing all correctly, protecting our trans homies, making sure that people who don't have, the same documentation status as us still are going to be able to stay in their homes and in their communities and all of that, right? Those are going to be our immediate concerns in the wake of a Donald Trump presidency, right? And because of that, we're not going to be able to be as vigilant as we might have been able to under a Kamala Harris presidency, pushing for something like climate change, right? Pushing her to stop fracking, saying, hey, offshore drilling in Alaska, the Willow Project, we can't repeat that. We have to stop that. We have to act immediately for our children, right? Under Donald Trump, everybody is going to be spread so thin because there's a million fires to put out, right? And I think what Noam Chomsky points out really eloquently here is that, of course, everybody's attention is going to be diverted to those issues. But one of the big ones, the overarching black cloud that's going to nuke us all, guys, that's going to turn on the human microwave, that's climate change. And we got to figure out a problem to that while we're simultaneously protecting all the people around us, because we can't allow the bottom to fall out while we're worried about what's raining from the sky.
Proto-fascist state, eliminate the civil service. Since the mid-19th century, like every other democratic society, the United States has had a nonpartisan civil service, which does most of the administration, which keeps the society running. Britain has the same. Others have the same. Trump has made it explicit that he wants to eliminate it, replace it by loyalists who'll be put in power. That undercuts what remains a functioning democracy. We can go on. It would be a colossal disaster, and it's not unlikely. You look at polls.
Yeah, no, I mean he's way ahead in the Republican nomination polls. What do you make of over here in the UK Brexit, which is now 8 years pretty much since we voted to?
And that's about the end of the U.S. policy that I wanted to get to with you guys. But there is something pretty crazy that I just had come across my feed. Speaking of the devil, Donald Trump, it looks like Trump backs up talk of using U.S. military to enforce mass deportation. So this is fucking horrifying, guys. This is something that we have to make sure we're extremely vigilant about. Donald Trump gave the nod on social media this morning to the notion that he wants to use the military to enforce his previous stated intentions for the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants from the United States once he gets into office. The Republican president-elect talked on the election campaign trail about declaring a national emergency in order to trigger powers that would facilitate a rare and highly controversial to engage the U.S. military to help deport millions of people he deems to be in the U.S. illegally. One, we have to full stop resist this, guys. I don't know how else to say this. When we talk about what is our moment, where do we meet the moment? Oh my gosh, what would we do in historical times? Guys, this is the time you show up. Guys, this is the time we mobilize. What Donald Trump time we mobilize for everybody, because what he's about to do is he's about to rip millions of people away from their homes, guys. The fabric of our society, what it means to be a nation is community, right? What he is going to do is he's going to set fire on that, because some of these people came here differently, right? All of our ancestors came here fucking illegally. You know why? Because there was no legal immigration. You got off the fucking boat, you signed a piece of paper, we gave you a fucking stupid name because we thought it sounded more American. We made you change your, my old roommate, his last name was Lipschwitz, and now it's Lipsit, right? Because we made it fucking dumb and Anglo. We took all the originality and creativity on it. That's our bad. This time we can correct it, right? We could just be good people. We can say, yes, come, bring your culture, help uplift us. We're a nation of immigrants. That's the thing that weaves us all together, right? We're a melting pot society. Let's abide by that, right? Let's stick it to these mega corporations that keep offshoring our jobs. Let's force them to pay workers to work here if they want to incorporate here. If you want to have all the benefits, if you want to reap all of the rewards of being a United States Fortune 500 company, guess what? You need to have our workers working here, making shit here. And guess what that means? It means you're going to need a lot of workers coming from other countries to meet your demand. That's great. That's called prosperity. That's how we build the world up. That's how we make this motherfucker a better place for us all to hang out in. And what we have to absolutely make sure does not happen is that they do not use the United States military, because they're going to have to use the United States military against U.S. citizens, because there's no way we're going to let this happen peacefully, guys. And I'm sorry, but we just can't abide by this. We're going to have to link our arms in arms and say, absolutely not. We're not letting these people get ripped from their country, because we also know that who cares what your documentation status is? I don't give a single fuck. It means absolutely nothing to me. It could be completely irrelevant, but there are other people who are here with legal status that are about to be in huge jeopardy. Let's talk about the people in Springfield, Ohio that were targeted, villainized, and harassed, the good Haitian people that have come here to make a better life for themselves. Guess what, guys? Haiti's fucked right now, and it's a lot our fault, and it's way more France's fault, okay? We have been forcing them under debt peonage since they had the audacity to revolt and say, hey, we don't want to be your fucking slaves anymore. Yeah, look into that, guys. The Haitian slave revolt, Chris Hedges used to say all the time, the Haitians have been paying for it ever since. We had Ruthie Louis-Jean on. She's the city council president for Boston. She's a first-generation Haitian woman, and she was talking to us. No, they literally have to pay money. That's what keeps the nation of Haiti poor. They have to pay money to France and to other countries that they owe in debt every single year. So, of course, they don't have meaningful infrastructure, right? We're putting our fucking boots on their throat to make sure of it. Okay, so now these people come to America. They want to work hard. They want to take care of their children. They want to be a part of a prosperous community. These people are Christians, exactly what fucking Republican Ohio, Leave It to Beaver motherfuckers want from them, right? They're uplifting the community. They're being involved. They're doing everything that a textbook American should, and now they're going to be targeted and booted back to a place that's unsafe, where they might not have any connections, where they might not have anywhere to go. Do you guys understand how horrifying that is? Imagine being a 25-year-old and being shipped to a place you don't fucking know. You don't have any connections. How are you going to get a job? You don't have an ID. You don't have a fucking social security card or whatever the equivalents are. Do you guys understand how horrifying that is? Do you guys understand what we're going to do to people? The severity of this, why we have to act, why we have to mobilize, because it's not just going to solve itself. What's going to happen is Donald Trump is going to get away with this if we don't act immediately, if we don't act right now. It's incumbent on us, guys. That's all we can say. We have to stay informed. We have to stay on our feet. We have to stay ready to fucking go, guys, because this is the moment that the rubber is hitting the road. Tom Fitton, the president of the influential conservative group, the Judicial Watch, has posted good news. Reports are in the incoming @real Donald Trump administration prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to remove the Biden invasion through a mass deportation program. Guys, like, I'm getting sick thinking about this. Like, my stomach is falling out. And I'm not trying to be, inflationist, or I'm not trying to be hyperbolic over here, guys. But there's a couple of things that we're just not discussing enough. We're not discussing how we're going to respond to this. I'm hearing a lot about how we're going to appeal to voters in 2028, and that's a great, philosophical thought experiment for everybody. But what I really need to hear more about is how we're going to mobilize. How are we going to resist? This is going to be horrible, And we can't have it all on. We can't have it. We just cannot have it, right? I don't want it on my conscience. I don't want to watch other people go through this. I don't want to have this happen. I don't want to read in the history book about how 1 million fucking people got ripped from their homes, and all I did was sit in my fucking desks and scream at my webcam to 50 people on our Clips channel. Are you kidding me? No, we have to get something together. We have to mobilize. Sorry, that was a piece of breaking news that caught my eye.